So there's a moment near the very end of the Starz series Black Sails where we're treated to a flashback of one of our main characters teaching another to sword fight, and these two don't know at this point that a couple months from now they'll be on opposite sides of the series' final conflict and will be forced to use what they learn on this hillside to fight each other. And the first time I saw this episode, I thought to myself, because I have Percy Jackson disease, hey, that's sort of like Percy Jackson, a series where the antagonist, Luke, teaches Percy how to sword fight, and once they're on opposite sides of the war, he knows every move Percy's going to make and vice versa. It's not as if there aren't 100 other stories that do something like this, but the longer I look at these two side by side, the more I notice they have in common, and the more I wonder if the two guys who wrote this scene in Black Sails were, say, put in charge of the Percy Jackson TV series adaptation on Disney+, could the answers to every question we have about how they might approach PJO lie in Black Sails? How do they approach the same characters, the same themes, the same moments? And more importantly, could I use this as an excuse to talk about Percy Jackson for 30 minutes straight?
Yes!
Yes.
In case you missed it, Percy Jackson and the Olympians, the middle grade series about the half-mortal children of the Greek gods written by Rick Riordan in the mid-2000s, is being made into a series by Disney+. Its first ever screen adaptation, despite how popular it is. This is the first time it's ever being adapted. Sorry, I had to grab my drawing tablet. Rick and his wife Becky are a major part of this adaptation and are working with showrunners Jonathan Steinberg and Dan Schatz, two men best known for their work on the TV series Black Sails. Along with them comes a team of writers that includes Joe Trax, Monica Owusu-Breen, and Daphne Olive, co-host of the Black Sails unofficial official podcast Fathoms Deep. Meaning nearly half of the writers' room for Percy Jackson is comprised of people whose most recent project was writing or analyzing Black Sails. Saying this is good news is a severe understatement. In case you're unfamiliar with it, Black Sails is a 4-season semi-historical pirate series that acts as a prequel to Robert Louis Stevenson's novel Treasure Island. It mainly follows my best friend Captain Flint, a clever, rageful, and feared pirate captain who seeks the treasure that will eventually belong to the titular Treasure Island, and John Silver, a charismatic and opportunistic manipulator on Flint's crew, soon to be one of the most famous pirates, fictional or otherwise, but for now, he's just a little guy. Competing for the treasure is a cast of pirates, thieves, and strategists, including historical pirates like Anne Bonny, Jack Rackham, and Charles Vane, as well as original creations like Max and Eleanor. Over time, the show develops from an admittedly rocky first season into a hugely rewarding and carefully written exploration of the other, of things like inevitability, oppression, revolution, and the power of a story. The show often feels almost like a novel since so many of the characters and themes are so thoroughly and purposefully and poetically laid out, and it can seemingly be analyzed endlessly despite being just 38 episodes long. The new showrunners coming from this show to Percy Jackson are also particularly good. John Steinberg was the co-creator of Black Sails and is credited as one of the writers of nearly every episode of the show's last 2 seasons, both widely regarded as the show's best. And Dan Schatz was a producer on Black Sails and wrote the majority of his episodes during those last 2 seasons, mainly in collaboration with John, including episode 3 of season 3 and episode 9 of season 4, aka 2 of Black Sails' most iconic episodes. Whenever these two partner up, their episodes are filled with enormous tension, heel turns, betrayal, and this relentless kind of joy. Like, even when things are dire and tragic, there's such an energy in these episodes. Humor, love, action, and heartbreak are each conveyed with an equal sense that John and Dan are having the time of their lives writing it somewhere, a quality that I genuinely can't wait to see find a place in Percy Jackson. But what I'm most curious about for the purposes of this video is what else is going to find a place in Percy Jackson. I mean, there are really obvious places where these writers make sense just at a glance. Black Sails and Percy Jackson are both adventure stories, both inspired by mythologized history and children's bedtime stories, both well known for dedicated representation of multiple communities, and both stories of trifectas and travel and found family, of wartime and its leaders, of water. But that doesn't tell us how they're going to approach the actual story, characters, or themes within the PJO series. For that, we'd have to dig deeper. And I brought a shovel. Wait, sorry, wrong image. There's a trope in Hollywood that's been popping up more and more consistently in recent years, a revolutionary that goes too far, is too violent, or wants too much and must be taken down by the story's heroes. Often what these antagonists are fighting for is good and right. They just, commit acts of terrorism for whatever reason. And it's all too common and never good, because if you're a writer trying to tell a story about a protagonist stopping a necessary change, you have to have a better, or at least more narratively satisfying reason than that they were being too mean about it. And I've honestly only been given that reason twice, in Percy Jackson and in Black Sails. Percy Jackson's variation on this trope works for a couple of reasons, the biggest being that this isn't just a case of Luke is right but he's too violent or goes too far, but a case of, even though the issue he's identified is a massive one, his point of view and the basis for his entire war are inherently flawed. When Luke says their parents created a civilization in which their children can only struggle and suffer, and that the gods refuse to acknowledge that they're corrupt and don't deserve their thrones anymore, He's right. Luke is also my best friend. However, Luke also believes that this issue is one of backward progression. He believes that the Titans their parents originally overthrew for their power were better rulers than what they have now, and that the world would be better off with them back in power. Essentially, he thinks that they need to return to the ways of the past and that that is where real change lies, rather than in creating something new. And that is why he's the villain, not because he's a revolutionary who's gone too far for the right reasons, but because his violent solutions are tied to an actual flaw in his thoughts on progress and what needs to change in his society. Percy's journey throughout this story is one of, at first, believing Luke is wholly wrong to question their parents like this, to then understanding where Luke is right and implementing that part of the change by creating something new, rather than looking to the way things used to be for answers. And there are plenty of issues here that the original series doesn't address. Percy basically attempts to reform the way the gods function, which in future series only backfires on him, as the gods, unsurprisingly, don't keep their promises and only prove themselves more corrupt. An issue Rick now, 10 books later, seems reluctant to put a good revolution toward. Coward. But at the center of the original series and all of its following spin-offs lies the corruption in the civilization the gods have created, and in that, all of the complexities that make Luke a difficult character to adapt. If you aren't equipped to dig into the many reasons he's both right and wrong, and why Percy is both right and wrong to stop him, it's all too easy to slip into Hollywood's tendency to offer a moderate solution and condemn the violence without properly handling the reason it's being done. If I trust Luke in anyone's hands, though, it's the Black Sails writers. In Black Sails, Captain Flint progresses through the seasons from a man attempting to create peace on the island of pirates he calls home, to a violent force set on getting revenge on England for all it has taken from him, to a revolutionary preparing to wage actual war throughout the colonies on every port England calls home. He leads this war effort with Maddie, a leader among a community of ex-slaves who would be fighting alongside Flint to free her people. This war is obviously a war worth fighting, but the majority of the main cast of this show is actually made up of characters who at some point oppose it or seek a more moderate solution. Not because Flint or Maddie have gone too far or become the villains in any way, but because the entire series is about people all forgotten by society, all ruined by the same oppressive force, having vastly different reactions. Whether that's beginning a war against civilization, assimilating into it, hiding yourself from it, changing it from within, or morphing into whatever best shields you from it. And at some point or another, we end up rooting for almost all of them, even as some of them attempt to stop the war that the entire series is dedicated to, because their actions are all coming from that same wounded place. This is how Black Sails skirts the violent revolutionary trope in a way that will work in Luke's favor. First, by making the revolutionary calling for an end to Western civilization spread into the Americas their protagonist, meaning that the war Luke, their new antagonist, is fighting involves something these writers just spent 4 seasons fighting for. And second, by ensuring that as violent and endless as Flint and Maddie's war appeared, stopping it was never a simple case of a revolutionary gone too far or a stop put to something getting out of hand, but of character motivations clashing to the point where one character can't possibly have what they want without destroying another. These writers have come at the idea of stopping a revolution that might have benefited you from so many angles, and Percy's is only another among them. If anyone can craft a version of Luke's revolution that is sympathetic to and invested in both his and Percy's causes, possibly even more than the original book series was, it's this man. And his pirate friends. Also important to note here, on their second day in the Percy Jackson show's writer's room, Becky actually tweeted that Luke got all the love today, which, the more I think about Black Sails, surprises me less and less. Speaking of the writer's room,
and there was just a moment where it didn't feel right. And it felt like I just had a moment of, I don't know who it was, if it was Mrs. Edelman or somebody else, sort of reaching out from somewhere in the subconscious that that 3 women knitting meant something.
That was Jonathan Steinberg, future PJO showrunner, talking to Daphne Olive, future PJO writer, back in 2017, in an episode of Fathoms Deep, the Black Sails podcast hosted by Daphne and her co-host Elizabeth Stevens. This episode is specifically about mythology and Black Sails, and is honestly worth a listen, not just because you presumably also have Percy Jackson disease, but because it's full of a lot of really neat analysis of the mythology of pirates and the intentional and unintentional connections between Black Sails and Greek mythology. Plus, listening to John Steinberg talk about the way he constructs stories is honestly so enlightening if you're a writer. There are things he talks about in every episode he's in this podcast that I'm probably going to carry with me for the rest of my writing career. Anyway, one of the most compelling parts of this episode for me is when Daphne breaks the characters of Black Sails into which Greek god they most embody. This isn't something that the writers intend, which John makes pretty clear here, but Daphne draws lines between Blackbeard and Prometheus, Maddie and Athena, Flint and Dionysus, as if these connections are natural and purposeful. She then analyzes the title Black Sails as a part of the Theseus myth, also an unintentional parallel, but once text is out in the world, do the intentions of the man you're literally talking to actually matter? Considering Daphne is in the Percy Jackson writer's room, this moment caught my attention for 2 reasons. The first being that it's a neat little window into how someone in our writer's room actually perceives these mythological characters that we'll see in PJO. Zeus as Woodes Rogers, for example, a man who represents civilization and the violence at its core, or Charles Vane as Poseidon, one I found particularly interesting for this quote.
And I said, but the cool thing about Poseidon is that he is also the god that controls earthquakes. So he's actually the person who takes the uncontrollable nature of the sea and imposes it on humans on the earth that they think is so stable.
The main reason this moment and this podcast as a whole stands out to me for the purposes of this video, though, is because of Daphne's ability to dig into the text and pull from it things that were both intentional and unintentional, treat them with the same intense and critical thought, and then present them directly to the man who created the thing she's analyzing, even as he tells her that what she's finding in it wasn't meant to be there. It's an approach to story analysis and authorial intent that is sure to be a useful superpower when sitting in the writer's room with Rick Riordan, the man whose work you're adapting. This is really exciting to me because it means this new adaptation will very likely find things in the PJO books that some of us, including Rick, might not have seen otherwise. I say very likely not just because we have Daphne in the room, but because this is actually already starting to happen. Annabeth's casting call went out in December 2021, and in the last two sentences we find this emphasis on the idea that she remembers very little of the human world and that Percy helps her reconnect with her humanity. That's not an idea that we dwell on in the books, but it makes total logical sense and adds something I find fascinating to her character that I'm really looking forward to seeing in this adaptation. And the best thing about this is that I've actually had this experience of watching Annabeth come to life through adaptation once before, watching the Lightning Thief musical, book written by another member of our Disney Plus writers' room, Joe Trax. Joe is another interesting addition to this writer's room. He's already worked on an adaptation of one of my favorite children's series, Netflix's A Series of Unfortunate Events, which, while it makes some changes I wasn't too thrilled about, I think did a pretty good job of capturing the original tone and characters from the books. But his experience with that show makes him the only one of these TV writers with experience writing for younger audiences, and he also probably has the most experience writing comedy, which is obviously an essential part of writing Percy Jackson. Most relevant to his ability to write Percy Jackson, though, is that he's already written Percy Jackson. I've seen this musical adaptation, I think, 5 times, twice while it was an hour-long one-act, then again off-Broadway, and twice on tour. There are a couple of reasons I found myself paying to see this show so many times, but the main reason was I was consistently in awe of how much the musical was able to develop new sides to these characters that I thought I knew like the back of my hand. Grover's song The Tree on the Hill, for example, emphasizes Grover's relationship with Talia's tree as what would have been years of living in the literal shadow of his mistake, a constant reminder of what he lost. The lead up to Annabeth's song, My Grand Plan, adds resentment directed at the invisibility cap her mother gave her because she spent her entire life feeling invisible. It's the reason she ran away from home in the first place, the reason she's been aching for a quest for so long. The musical is full of these little things that feel so natural to the characters but that don't actually get addressed within the original text, and that is what this addition to Annabeth's character in the casting call feels like to me, just on a larger scale. And all of this isn't to say these characters aren't this complex in the books. Annabeth in the books is intelligent and prideful and stubborn and difficult to read and deeply emotional and afraid to be deeply emotional, and she's judgmental and kind of mean, which I say lovingly. She's a character attempting to prove herself while also attempting to keep a handle on the found family falling apart around her, and what she wants in the end is actually similar to what Luke wants, to be able to build a new and better world and to prove her worth while she does it, except that in Annabeth's mind that means building it for the people she loves, including her godly parent, rather than as a revolutionary act in spite of her godly parent. All of which I fully believe that John and Dan are capable of bringing to the screen as showrunners based on Black Sails. If I were to compare her to the characters they've already written, I'd say she's probably most similar to Jack in terms of goals, both dedicated to proving themselves in the eyes of others, both attempting to build something that will leave them remembered, both persistent and dangerous and capable. And personality-wise, she's probably closest to Eleanor, or maybe even Flint. They've both got the intelligent, prideful, stubborn, difficult to read, deeply emotional, etc. thing going on. All that to say, the ability to write these things that already exist within Annabeth's character is there within multiple of these writers' creations. There's proof that they can write her and write her well. But rather than accept that and translate her as is for the screen, based on this casting call, these writers are engaging with her, they're in conversation with her, finding things in her that aren't put into words in the original text. And what's especially exciting is that that approach to adaptation is all over Black Sails in the way these writers treat Treasure Island. As a prequel, Black Sails obviously has more wiggle room than a straight adaptation would to make changes and extrapolate based on what's in the text, but Black Sails literally refuses to take anything in Treasure Island at face value. Rather than just create a story that cleanly leads into the book, it makes itself about the act of storytelling and the truth that may or may not live in Treasure Island. The show tells stories that completely change the original context of moments from the book, like Billy receiving the black spot, or Jim Hawkins revealing to Silver that he's been one step ahead of him so that Silver will be forced to take him seriously, or Silver going after the treasure in the first place. There's only one scene in Treasure Island that's fully adapted in Black Sails, and even that rejects the accuracy of the story that Ben Gunn tells in the book. In all of these changes and contradictions with Treasure Island, though, Black Sails never does it without a purpose and without remaining in touch with the story's roots. It isn't just a straightforward prequel, it's a dialogue that adds to every reread of Treasure Island. That's how all of these writers approach adaptation. And as long as we haven't been fooled into fearing allowing the story to morph in service of the original text because of a different adaptation that turned its back on it, that is probably the aspect these writers bring to Percy Jackson that I'm most excited for. Also, I think it's worth noting while we're here that Monica Owusu-Breen, also in the PJO writers' room, has also already developed a book-to-screen adaptation with Midnight Texas, which I haven't seen or read and can't really talk about. But in a lot of her interviews about the series, she talks about the importance of honoring the text and adding to what already exists rather than taking scenes away. And according to this Hypable article, the series also upped the supernatural element, fixed the pacing, and developed underdeveloped relationships, so that all sounds promising. Also, Aubrey's husband is alive, in what I assume is a shocking twist.
My two special boys.
There is one element to all of this that we haven't talked about yet that's going to make or break this series, and that is the man, the myth, the legend himself, my very best friend in the whole world, and I mean that, Percy Jackson. Rather than try to describe him here myself, I'm going to let the casting call do it for me. Percy is smart, compassionate, with a sharp sense of humor, sees himself as an outsider, but he's not a wallflower. He's impulsive and rambunctious, and quick to anger, and sarcastic, and cynical, and affectionate, and loyal. This child has every personality trait. And to complicate that further, in the books, the majority of his personality exists almost exclusively in his internal monologue. He's essentially two different people in the original series, the comedic, quick-witted, loudly opinionated version of himself that exists within his mind, and the quieter, brooding, sarcastic version of himself that the people around him know. For a first-person book series, this makes sense. For basically any other medium, this is dangerous, because now you have to convey an inner monologue without your audience being immersed in it. So much of Percy, as we understand him, never actually breaks the surface from the first-person narration into his dialogue, that the moment Rick himself stepped out of Percy's point of view into third person in the Heroes of Olympus series, he struggled to consistently write Percy fully in character. Either Disney Plus needs to pair talented writers with the most talented little 12-year-old alive for this series, or Percy has to actually narrate this series, which also makes me nervous because narration can be so hit or miss in film and TV if you aren't super careful about when and how you use it. It's why I always thought a musical was the ideal medium for him, because his narration could exist comically or tragically within his songs. Either that or the Fleabag approach. In transferring him to a film series, though, no matter what, it's very possible we'll lose pieces of him along the way because so much of him exists only for the reader. And honestly, I don't think I trust anyone writing this kid. Not Rick, because he's never done it for TV, and not entirely our friends from Black Sails. Narration does exist in Black Sails, but it's always diegetic. It's dialogue actually spoken in another time or place played over a scene, or a letter or diary entry read aloud for the audience's benefit. So who knows if they could pull off Percy's narration if they go that route. And in terms of character, Flint and Silver are both deeply complex main characters with huge inner worlds, but in different ways than I think Percy is. Discovering what moves beneath the surface of both of them is essential to the show because both of them have purposefully tucked pieces of their true selves away, something I don't think Percy's doing. I think he's just like that, like most people are, different on the inside than he is on the outside. So while I'm sure they'll be able to layer in all of Percy's complexities, it's really hard to look at Black Sails and actually guess at how they're going to approach Percy's inner monologue. Despite that, though, I do think Silver is the clearest indicator of how Percy's going to be handled as a character in this series. Silver's very different from Percy, but his character development throughout Black Sails does move him from vaguely comparable to Percy to being a sort of bizarro counterpart to him within the Steinberg universe. From their shared quick wit and instinct toward resourceful thinking and manipulation as a means of defeating opponents rather than winning in a straight fight, to their growth into a reluctant yet capable leader, to the rage and ever-growing power that comes with that, to their rocky relationship with authority. These two characters share so much despite being so different from each other that I could honestly make an entire video just comparing and contrasting them. And the fact that Silver is so consistent and has such exciting character development throughout the series is obviously a good sign. There are two major facets of Silver's character that I want to talk about when it comes to John and Dan's ability to write Percy, though. The first being the ideas of want, inevitability, and life as a book character. Narrative agency and existence within a story that's written by forces outside of your control are both ideas that are at the core of Black Sails and are essential to every single character in its cast, but John Silver is one of few for whom this struggle is with the real-life author and the literal story he inhabits. A large part of the tragedy at the center of Silver's character is that he's in a prequel. Where Flint has his role to play in setting up Treasure Island, Silver is Treasure Island. He's defined by that future. He may have control over the events of the show, but where he ends is inevitable. He's a literary icon, one of the most famous villains in children's literature, ingrained in the minds of generations as the definition of a pirate. That classic image of a one-legged pirate with a parrot on his shoulder searching for buried treasure, that is Long John Silver. That's his legacy. And he meets every individual moment that defines that legacy with a sentiment that haunts every corner of this show.
Because I don't want to be a pirate.
I don't want this. Did you not fucking hear me? I said I do not want this.
I did not want this. This is not what I wanted.
Look, I didn't want to be a half-blood.
Despite the fact that Percy Jackson is his own story's narrator, it's made very clear from line 1 that the last thing he wants to be doing is telling it. But he's the child of a prophecy made long before he was born and is subject to the whims of the gods and the literal fates, and now he's trapped within a story he wants out of, not unlike John Silver. From the moment Silver and Percy take the stage, certain events in their lives are locked into place. That lack of agency extends into both of their everyday lives as the gods or England or the Fates or Flint or Chiron or plain destiny push them into actions they never would have taken otherwise and put them in a place where they're constantly trying to wrangle things into a state in which they have at least some say in the way that they play out, and maybe even eventually find the means to walk away from this story that's built up around them. That warning to the reader in the opening portion of The Lightning Thief has always read to me in this way, like a grasp for some kind of control in, at the very least, the way Percy's audience reacts to his story since he has no control over his content. This vulnerability to the inevitable is at the core of both of these characters who are a part of legend before they've even entered the story, only to find that they are, unfortunately, its intended protagonist. And I'm not going to pretend Percy and Silver are on the same page here. Percy makes the active choice to remain the chosen one in the Titan's Curse, and then again in Battle of the Labyrinth in order to keep Nico from having to become the protagonist that Percy never wanted to be, while Silver never gets a choice in his becoming the main character. Silver also gives up his claim to the role the moment he has the chance, something Percy doesn't do until Trials of Apollo, and before that point genuinely seems bothered when he isn't involved in what seems like the plot to him in Heroes of Olympus now that he's used to the narrative following him around. But existence within a narrative that's being dictated to you and the ways that you react to that narrative is essential to who these characters become in the end. It's an idea that John, Dan, and Daphne have likely spent hours thinking on when it comes to Black Sails, and I can't help but feel it'll come in handy when writing Percy Jackson. Especially because the question for both of these characters when facing the consequences of this predetermined legacy then becomes, what are you going to do about it? Which is where the second major aspect of Silver's character connects with Percy's, the fatal flaw. Percy's fatal flaw is well known. He would sacrifice the entire world just to save a friend. That's what Athena explicitly tells him. An arguably selfish flaw, and one that we unfortunately never see the costs of, which is one of my biggest gripes with the Percy Jackson series because it's such a potentially dangerous flaw to have. We do see Percy's warped version of loyalty throughout the series as an aspect of Percy's personality and motivations. He's constantly putting the people he personally cares about before anyone else, joins quests he's not meant to be on, and endangering all involved for their sake. And the moment he believes someone's betrayed his loyalty to them, they're dead to him, be it Luke actually betraying him or Nico trying his best. But this apparent flaw never comes with consequences. He's basically always proven right to be this way. We kind of just spend the whole series warning people that Percy might endanger the war if the people he loves are in danger, but then winning the war and saving the people he loves just kind of go hand in hand in the end, so you're left wondering whether personal loyalty is really a flaw to begin with, especially because it's a flaw a lot of people can probably relate to. But in Silver's case, this flaw is exactly what ends not just his story, but the entire series. He sacrifices the entire war, betrays everyone who loves him, and potentially kills one of them if he played the Black Sails genocide route, all because the idea of losing Maddie proves too much for him to bear. This is the sort of importance that Percy's fatal flaw should have had. This is what Percy has the potential to do. I talk a big game about how Percy should lead a revolution against the gods, but if it came down to removing the gods from power or ensuring Annabeth or Grover or Sally's safety, Percy and Silver are of the same mind. They share this character flaw. And I think because Black Sails invested so much in this flaw actually tearing the whole story down, these writers can't possibly share Rick's instinct to let this flaw slide. I'm sure that they'll do a great job of bringing what's on the page to the screen in this case, and the fact that they've already written a character with this flaw will help them understand Percy. But this is also one aspect of this series that I'm begging them to mess around with. Let this flaw actually have consequences, even if they're minor. Give it a reason to be a flaw. Whether or not they take my advice, though, these connections between Silver and Percy are, I think, some of the clearest evidence we have of what the Percy Jackson show is really going to look like, especially in its later seasons. The comedy Silver brings in seasons 1 and 2, the resourcefulness, the quick thinking, the growth into a leader, into a man to be feared, into a legend, the impulse toward the preservation of self and loved ones, the role in a story written long before their time, the role in the dismantling of a revolution. When I look at Silver, I see the instincts these writers are going to bring into writing Percy, whether they mean to or not. Actually, while we're talking about this, writing this section has been very hard for me, not because I don't see the flaws in Black Sails or I'm reluctant to talk about them. I make my living as a dramaturg and story consultant. Reading scripts and figuring out how they can improve is literally what I do for work, and I'm now doing for fun because I can't stop. But also because I know that if I were watching this video, I wouldn't just want to hear the good stuff. If we're actually trying to guess at what this show is going to be like, we need to talk about what they might fumble. For example, I think Black Sails' biggest flaw is often wasted potential, usually brought on by the fact that it has an extremely white writer's room. Like, the entire show is a battle over land, and there's not one mention of the indigenous people who were there before any of them. And then there's the mountain of potential that exists within the Maroon plotline, and characters like Mr. Scott, and Julius, and the Queen, and Joshua. Can you imagine if Joshua was there when they got to the Maroon Island? When they give these stories space to breathe and develop and conflict with each other, it's incredible, but the writers so often let them fall to the wayside in favor of other stories. I still don't see how you decide to write a plotline like Maddie and the Queens into the core of your show and not bring more black writers into the writer's room. There's so much more that could be done here. And the PJO show does have a mainly white writer's room again, so I'm keeping my eye on how they're rewriting Annabeth, is what I'm trying to say. The reason I think I'm having trouble extrapolating much else from Black Sail's flaws, though, is that a lot of them are either issues in season 1 that the writers obviously learned from, or they're things that Rick handles better than they do, like the fact that Black Sail's minor characters often just kind of do whatever the writers need from them in the moment, while Rick's at least feel like they might actually lead lives outside of when they're on screen. Or the flaws are symptoms of the kind of show that Black Sails was, which Percy Jackson is not. And I don't mean because it's an R-rated pirate show, I mean because it's an original story. In original television, the story is being written as it's being performed. There are not multiple drafts of a story in television. There are multiple drafts of each episode, or maybe even of the full season, but you can't write the entire story and then rework it. So even if you had it all outlined, if you come up with something you shouldn't have done when you wrote season 1 while you're writing season 2, or something comes to you while planning season 3 that you should have planned it earlier, it's too late. You've published those chapters. That is a consequence of writing an original piece of television. And of writing an original book series. You can't actually know what you're going to write in book 5 while writing book 1. With the Percy Jackson show, though, the story's already been written. They have their story plotted out this time, meaning this TV show can be a second draft. The second draft you never get when creating these kinds of stories. So looking at Black Sail's flaws like this, it's hard for me to tell exactly what to worry about. Honestly, it just makes me curious what kind of second drafts these writers make. What happens when these writers are given the chance to rework a story that's already written? Especially because they're coming from a show so entrenched in the idea of the act of adaptation as a means of conversation with the original text that at times the entire show feels like a narrative essay on the subject. And they are once again bringing all of the critical thought that went into that show to a children's book. I think that fact alone proves the possibilities and respect these showrunners bring to this series they're about to adapt. They got all of this out of a children's book. There's no reason they shouldn't bring that energy to this one. Unless they underestimate its audience. This is the main thing I'm actually worried about. I really think the success of this adaptation all comes down to how they decide to approach translating these books for kids Percy's age. You know, it's one thing to understand the content you're adapting, which I think I've made it pretty clear I think they do, but it's another to understand the audience you're adapting it for, and literally like one person in this writer's room has experience writing television for a younger audience. And that is a specific skill, knowing how and when to give your audience information and how much to give them and how much to trust them and what language to use to make sure you're understood, how to manage the real world danger and violence that exists within a book like Percy Jackson, and how to manage the fact that you no longer have Percy's narration to act as a barrier between the world around him and the reader. It's all a delicate thing, and understanding it and constructing it successfully is honestly so rare in live action children's media. I do think A Series of Unfortunate Events probably came as close as any, but the rest of this writer's room has very little experience with creating television for this age group. It would be all too easy for them to overcompensate for that and hold back, or undercompensate and make something their older fans would probably honestly enjoy, but that their intended audience would be lost by. But if they can figure out how to successfully do that for their younger audience, I think the older one will follow. There's a reason certain shows made for children have large adult audiences, and it's all in their ability to understand where the line is, how to walk it, and when to cross it. The way that they trust their audience but still understand the pacing and environment that they require, the fact that they confidently layer in complex storytelling and understand how best to convey it to their audience now and as they and their characters grow older. The fact that they tell their story in a way that never makes the indignant child that's going to see themselves in Percy feel spoken down to. Honestly, if they can manage that, I think they've probably succeeded. The writers coming to this show are talented people, and I do trust them for the most part, based on what I've seen them do, so my worries for this series come more from what they haven't done than from what they have, and from the possibility that the real mastermind behind Black Sails was the other showrunner, and this entire video was for nothing. There are about 1,000 things I cut from this script that I wanted to talk more about, like Black Sails' approach to individual scenes that are similar to those in Percy Jackson, Black Sails' approach to depicting dreams on screen, an essential aspect of adapting Percy Jackson, which episodes have the most Percy Jackson vibes, what moments from The Lightning Thief I think this team will most excel at bringing to the screen, and what I think they might cut. Plus, I took so long to make this video that there are now like 5 other things that I could include, like the cast, or Luke and Sally's audition sides, which leaked, and I won't talk about them here, but they are something. And also, the new show The Old Man comes out in June and has John Steinberg, Dan Schatz, and Daphne Olive behind the scenes, and is also a book adaptation, so we'll have plenty to talk about then. Really, this video could have been 5 hours of me overthinking questions I'll literally have the answers to in a year or so, but what those 5 hours would all come down to is I think we're pretty lucky to have these showrunners. John and Dan's previous collaborations have been some of my favorite stories put to screen, and the way John talks about his projects shows the incredible amount of critical creative thought he dedicates to his work. If I could have chosen any established TV writers to be the showrunners for the Percy Jackson adaptation, these two honestly probably would have been at the top of my list. And I'm very excited to see all that they have in store for us. Also within the Percy Jackson universe, Blackbeard was actually turned into a guinea pig on Cersei's Island, was a guinea pig from 1760 until 2006 when he had his ship stolen by Percy and Annabeth, after which he kidnapped Raina and her sister and held them captive until her sister dueled him for their freedom. Please bring Ray Stevenson back as Blackbeard in season 2 of Percy Jackson. It would be very, very funny to me.